Coming up, one more shocking reason to vote against The Voice on Saturday. I think there's a connection between The Voice and the terrible protests in support of the Islamic terrorists who slaughtered Jews. Wait till I explain that. Plus, how Labor politics is behind its shocking reaction to that horror. It's really been caught out, the Prime Minister in particular. And Chris Bowen, the Energy Minister, are warning that we should stock up on candles. But before I get to the main controversy today, let's lighten it by some great news, surprising news this afternoon. The Prime Minister announced that the Chinese dictatorship has finally released Cheng Lei, an Australian journalist who's been jailed for 3 years on totally bogus charges of spying or endangering national security.
I was able to have a conversation with an Australian citizen, Cheng Lei, who has arrived safely here in Melbourne and has been reunited with her 2 children and her family.
Now, Albanese suggested Cheng's release was just because it was the end of a court process. The court process had just come to an end, when in fact it seems like a political decision by China to let go someone who's been holding almost like a hostage or a bargaining chip.
China would not say that that's the position. China would say that the judicial processes had been completed in China.
But congratulations to the Prime Minister. That said, there is still another Australian, a writer and a dissident, still held in a Chinese jail for 4 years now. China may have released Cheng Lei, but it is still a dictatorship without the rule of law. Joining me is Sky News US correspondent Annalise Nielsen, who has run a long campaign to free Cheng Lei. She's a former colleague when both of them worked in China. Annalise Nielsen, congratulations on the work you've done on this case. You've spoken to Cheng Lei's family. What can you tell us?
Well, look, I've just been speaking to Nick today, her partner, who I've been working with pretty closely over the last few years to see this happen. And as much as we were hoping this would happen, it all has also happened very quickly. And so Cheng Lei was taken on a commercial airline, we're told, from China with Graham Fletcher, the ambassador, who's one of many people who've done a lot of unsung work in this to get her home. And they've arrived. And so we hear that the kids are hugely relieved and happy. Nick's completely stopped answering my calls or messages. And so I think that means that they're catching up, and that's exactly what we wanted to happen. But yeah, this has been 3 years of hard work, and it started with your program. And I'm sorry, this is an emotional thing, because when we started out, we didn't know how it was going to end. And the fact it's ended here is basically one of our best case scenarios. And I know I work for News Corp, they're my bosses, but they backed me in with this. It was sticking my neck out, and you backed me in as well. And we're really grateful for that. And I'm sorry, it's 4 a.m. as well. I'm very tired, I haven't slept. But the other person who needs credit here is Penny Wong. This wouldn't have happened without her.
Well, don't congratulate us. We just gave you a platform. It was your effort, and I'm so in admiration of what you've done. How much has Cheng Lei been affected by your ordeal, do you know?
Well, look, we know from the consular visits that she was really struggling. I mean, imagine not seeing a tree for 3 years, not having sunlight, and not knowing when it's going to end. I think that was the worst part. And so I think she was just looking forward to sentencing. So we know now that Chinese Foreign Ministry has said 2 years, 11-month sentence. So basically they just gave her time served. So I think if you needed a better indicator of just what a political maneuver this was, that's it, the fact that she's here now. But thank God we had some political maneuvering on our side to get her out, because that's what happens in these situations. And it wasn't fair. It shouldn't have happened. She shouldn't have spent one single day in that cell. But the fact she's not spending one more day there is just the best thing we could have hoped for.
Yeah, the whole thing seems awfully rigged. Why do you think she was released? The Prime Minister says the Chinese legal process just ran its course. I don't believe that for a second. What do you think is the real reason?
Well, I mean, it did and it didn't. It has a 99% conviction rate in China. So if you end up in that spot, you're barely getting out any possibility without some kind of conviction. Look, this has been our constant discussion for 3 years. We've floated so many theories. We've heard so many theories. And I think at the end of the day, she was just the wrong place, wrong time. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm not privy to the highest level communications, as you can imagine. I'm not sitting there with the Foreign Minister and the PM talking to the Premier of China, but I just think it's the only thing that really makes sense. And I think it just took this long to maneuver her out. And I wish it didn't take this long.
Annelies Nielsen, for your part in this, well done. Virtue has its rewards. Go and have some sleep. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew.
But to the main story today, this horror in Israel. It has now exposed the Prime Minister, has exposed his voice, has exposed Labour. Things have become deadly clear, the dangers to Jewish Australians particularly, the threats now. But I have to ask where the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has been for nearly 2 days. He was hanging around Uluru for a stunt for his voice, making waffly speeches to justify dividing us by race, as if we're not already seeing with this Jew hatred on our streets the danger of things like that.
And this is a campaign about love for our fellow Australians and about respect. But it's also about love of ourselves. Whether we have the courage to love what Australia is.
What are this Prime Minister's priorities? I mean, there he was making dreamy speeches behind it, with a fabulous background behind him, dreamy speeches about this voice, his plan to divide us by race with an Aboriginal-only advisory parliament, when right now Australian Jews are feeling hunted, literally hunted, threatened on our streets by barbarians. And there is a link here with the voice. But again, a warning. I'm going to show you video that could shock and upset some viewers. We have seen here what nobody could have imagined, crowds of Jew haters celebrating the murder of 1,000 Jews in Israel, whole families murdered by Islamic terrorists who also shot dead this Australian grandmother, Galit Carboni. Other women were raped, 130 people were taken hostage, many of them women, some still bleeding. They were taken back to Gaza and paraded to cheering crowds. Even children were taken hostage, including these. And now there are unconfirmed claims by Israeli soldiers that they found in one kibbutz the bodies of 40 babies, some of them beheaded.
Most of them were students with small families, 2 children, 1 children, or students. Average ages are between 18 to 25. You can see the brutality and see for yourself.
Yet, despite seeing all that, in front of Australia's most iconic building, protesters, guarded by the New South Wales Police, celebrated all of that and screamed for Jews to be gassed. I've never seen anything like it in our streets. This is a national issue, a national shame. And you have people feeling real fear. Last night, as you know, I talked to an Anglican cleric who was chased for a couple of blocks by Muslim protesters angry at his Israeli flag. Now this video of a man threatened to kill Jewish youths if they didn't hide their Israeli flag. Meanwhile, in Melbourne, police are investigating a claim that 4 men of Middle Eastern appearance stopped in Toorak and told someone else, a bloke there, that they were hunting Jews, wanted to kill them too. What is this, Nazi Germany now? And the threats are so serious that the New South Wales Police today created a task force to protect Jews from Muslims and far-left extremists.
We're having high visibility operations around synagogues, around Jewish schools, and speaking to the Jewish Board of Deputies this morning, we are going to also increase visibility around Jewish hospitals.
That this sort of thing is needed now, this sort of protection in Australia makes me sick. And the world is watching our shame. I mean, police protection for Jewish schools. How did Australia get to this? But again, where is the Prime Minister? There he was, faffing around, issuing guarded criticism, yes, of those anti-Jewish protesters. He did do that minimum. But some of his ministers who have Sydney seats with up to 1/4 Muslim voters, right? What a disgrace. Tony Burke, Chris Bowen, not a word of criticism from them with the hate preachers and the hate protests. Only late this afternoon, 4 days after the slaughter in Israel, did Albanese finally get around to visiting a synagogue in support. The voice had to come first. But Albanese still hasn't held a National Security Committee meeting on this war between Hamas and Israel, even though this could cause violence in our streets, even though this war could go anywhere, even though one Australian at least is dead over there, even though 10,000 Australians in Israel are in danger.
And it's unbelievable that the National Security Committee hasn't met to talk about our equities in the Middle East, what happens in relation to staff, not just in Israel, but in Lebanon, in surrounding areas otherwise, if there's a need for an evacuation, what happens here in terms of the policing effort, the coordination around places where people of Jewish faith are gathering.
I mean, all this is just highlighting how distracted Anthony Albanese has been for a year now with this voice. It's not this issue, of course, bread and butter ones as well. And now going to Uluru at a time like this for picture opportunities as runner Pat Farmer finishes his Round Australia run to drum up support for a voice that looks as dead as a dodo. And what makes Albanese's preoccupation with the voice seem so stupid, particularly now, is that there is this link, I've said, with this tension we're now seeing. Now, I know many peace-loving people of good heart, including Jews, support the voice. I'm not talking about them. But also supporting the voice are a striking number of the people now celebrating this barbaric attack on Israel. I don't think it's a coincidence. Now, you wonder how some Australians can look at these horrors and celebrate with fireworks and hold marches in Sydney and Melbourne attacking Israel. And I think the answer is tribalism. Tribalism, that mob madness where you treat your tribe as always right no matter how wrong. That dehumanizes other people, treats them in their lives as not really worth much. That tells us that we're not all Australians together, our tribe comes first. And this voice is also tribalism. It also seeks to divide us into tribes, warring tribes. So to me, it is not surprising to have seen Aboriginal flags being waved in both the Sydney and Melbourne anti-Israel protests this week, or to see the organisers of the Melbourne protest against Israel backing the voice, or to learn that Sydney's Imam Ibrahim Dadoun filmed screaming that the slaughter of the Jews was a day of pride, or at least the Hamas attack was a day of pride, a victory. Last year also preached that the voice was very important in coming to terms with what happened with the Aboriginal community. Nor is it a surprise that the Australian National Imams Council, our top Islamic body, last month declared Australian Muslims say yes to the voice, and this week responded to the horror in Israel by saying it supports the Palestinian people. Not a word of criticism of Hamas. In fact, the Lebanese Muslim Association, it directly linked the voice with the terrorists. It said the Lebanese Muslim Association sees the trials and tribulations suffered by Australia's First Nations peoples in the 235 years since British settlement commenced. That's similar to the more than 75 years of persecution allegedly inflicted on the people of Palestine by Israel. And it's not just Muslims making this connection, right? Hamas, Palestinians, the voice. Rugby league star Josh Adokar posted an image of both the Aboriginal and Palestinian flags with the legend, "One struggle, one fight, land back." God spare us if the notion grows that Aborigines consider white Australians just like Hamas considers Jews. Yet again and again, we see prominent campaigners for this race-based voice, especially the Greens, now using this Hamas attack to beat Israel. Greens Deputy Leader Mehreen Faruqi tweeted, "I stand with Palestine." New South Wales Greens MP Abigail Boyd, she damned the decision to light up the Opera House in Israeli colours.
The decision to light up the Opera House in the colours of the Israeli flag is misguided and represents a trend of continuously ignoring the plight of the Palestinian people.
Sure, Greens leader Adam Band did at least condemn the occupation in a sentence, very perfunctorily, but in the very next sentence attacked Israel, not Hamas. We condemn the occupation. It's so sick. How can people be so deaf to the screams of the victims of the side they support? It's tribalism that explains it, and we have to fight it. Now, I know people naturally prefer their own. I'm cheering the Dutch cricket team at the World Cup. There you go. But governments mustn't cement these kinds of differences into our constitution, especially differences of race. That's not their job. Their duty is instead to remind us through laws and rituals that what unites Australians is bigger than what divides. And that is the sin of this voice. It would divide us even more, just as some Muslims are now hunting Jews in our streets. Now, this war on Israel was ordered by Hamas. It's a terrorist group that runs Gaza and it's 2 million people, a group that openly says Israel must be destroyed. And that's why it's so frustrating to hear people like the Greens say, even now, that Israel must make a peace deal with Hamas. But how can it make peace with Hamas that has just proved it actually wants Jews dead? Not peace, it wants Jews dead. Make no mistake about that. Here are just some of the Hamas preachers and officials who have made that so clear that there is no excuse for thinking Hamas wants peace.
اللهم مكننا من رقاب يهود اللهم مكننا من رقاب يهود فلقد اقترب يوم ذبحكم وصالكم والقضاء عليكم حتى لا يبقى يهودي ولا صهيوني على وجه هذه الأرض. عقيدتنا في قتالكم أننا سنبيدكم على بكرة أبيكم ولن نبقي منكم أحدا.
اقتلوهم حيث ثقفتموهم، ما فيش بنعرفش حدد وين ما بنستطيع سنقاومهم.
Unbelievable. Right now, Israel is preparing a massive invasion of Gaza to destroy Hamas and rescue the hostages if possible. Joining me from Tel Aviv to give us the latest on this war is Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner of the Israeli Defense Forces. Colonel, thank you so much for your time. We've had reports that we've discussed earlier in the show from Kibbutz Kfar Azar that your soldiers have found as many as 40 children killed, many babies, some beheaded. Has that been confirmed?
We have, I witnessed reports of this and several cases of children that have been mutilated as well. Of course, this is a war crime and the situation where terrorists felt free to inflict such a horrific damage on civilians, on women, children, the elderly, just goes to show who our enemy is and what they're about.
Can I go to the progress of your struggle here? Have you now eliminated all the terrorists who got out of Gaza and attacked the kibbutzes and towns? Are they all eliminated?
So over the last 24 hours, we still found 16 different terrorists in different locations throughout southern Israel. There is still a real threat that there are still terrorists, Hamas terrorists, holed up in different locations in the southern area. So we are taking extreme care and caution and operating with vigilance in order to take out, engage, find, seek out, and kill them if possible.
Now, the concern has been that this could easily expand to a wider war with Hezbollah, another Islamic terrorist group to the north, you're bordered with Lebanon, but also Syria. You've had mortar fire now come in from over the border with Syria to your northeast. Who fired on you and how serious was this?
So the mortar fire, indeed, both from Syria and from Lebanon yesterday, and we've had, even just as we were going on, we have an exchange of an anti-tank guided missile against our forces on the border with Lebanon, and we're currently responding with artillery fire. So it can be a plethora of enemies that we have. You know, there are still many people in this region that are bent on our destruction and have not come to terms that Israel is here in the state of Israel. So we are currently operating in order to safeguard if there are Palestinian-related organizations from Syria, which is what appears to be from this morning, or Hezbollah in Lebanon, we will defend the state of Israel and the people of Israel.
Meanwhile, you have been bombing targets in Gaza. What have you been targeting? How many raids have you made there?
Our activities are extensive, thorough, intelligence-based against Hamas, its infrastructure, its operations capabilities, its staging grounds for attacks, its technological capabilities, its spotting capabilities. Hamas is being hunted down as we speak. We have struck hundreds of locations over the last 4 days. We will continue to do so, and Hamas can never, ever be permitted to use the Gaza Strip as a staging ground to butcher and murder Israelis in their beds. We won't permit that, and that is what our operation is intended to prevent.
Lieutenant Colonel Lerner, any news about the hostages?
Unfortunately, we've not received anything over the airwaves. The situation is dire. Obviously, Hamas are accountable for their well-being. We expect them to release the Israelis immediately. We are very happy with the international support, realizing that this atrocity is unacceptable, and the world is rallying around Israel in support of Israel and against Hamas. So I would say we need to look out for those that have been abducted, the hostages. It's an unacceptable situation, and we will work to bring them back home.
Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, that's a hell of a task you've got there. All the best. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, the question is how Labor has reacted so badly to this terrorist attack on Israel. I mean, how much of that is incompetence? How much is it ideology? I'm going to talk to two former Labor politicians, one of whom at least is hopping mad. Cheng Lei, the Australian journalist who was held for 3 years in a Chinese jail for absurd charges of spying and all that, and has now just been released, just flown back home, I think to Melbourne, has just released a statement, which I'll read to you. Tight hugs, teary screams, holding my kids in the spring sunshine. Trees shimmy from the breeze. I can see the entirety of the sky now. Thank you, Aussies. Good luck to her. But straight to the panel, Michael Costa, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer and former Police Minister, which is relevant to this discussion, and Michael Danby, former Federal Labor MP. Gentlemen, Michael Danby, this is going to be awkward with the two Michaels, both the New South Wales Labor government and the Albanese Labor government seem to me to have been flat-footed in dealing with this tragedy, with this disgraceful Jew hatred we're now seeing on our streets. Is that how you see it, flat-footed reaction?
Well, Albo's statement was better than Penny Wong's. He was in the wrong place. Rishi Sunak was in a synagogue responding to all of these massacres and terrible rapes and killings of children. That was the right thing to do. The New South Wales government's worse. As Michael said during the break, Daly and the police minister are bozos, really. The fact that they're ministers is a problem for Chris Minns. Fancy going on the radio, Michael Costa, as Daly did yesterday, and not knowing what was going on in your own streets and saying that people should keep away from the Opera House. All the people of New South Wales should be in fear of these 200 gangsters last night yelling out, "Gas the Jews." What a terrible Attorney General. Resign, Michael Daly, resign.
But Michael Costa, it's just, there are two issues here. One is the handling of what happened there, that outrage that was beamed to the world, chance of gas the Jews, etc. The other is that those people exist. They walk on our streets. Who let them or their families into this country? And plus the policing, of course. What's going on here?
Oh, look, Andrew, there's no question this has been a disgraceful handling of this situation. And let's also not forget, and I want to make a comment about all the fellow travellers here that are giving comfort to these people. You know, you've got a bunch of people out there that will take offence at being misgendered or try and cancel you, yet give comfort to terrorists. I mean, you know, it is unbelievable when you see university. I know they're university students, but to have these people out there giving comfort to these terrorists. Let's be very clear about this. It's no longer acceptable to hide behind this sort of anti-Zionism as being the basis for your protests. I mean, the fact of the matter is that anti-Zionism is code for anti-Semitism, and that's the reality of it all. They hide behind those weasel words. I mean, if you look at Gaza, it is occupied, but it's occupied by Hamas, not Israel. And I find it extraordinary. These people don't know the basic facts, yet they're out there making protestations, you know, that they support some sort of underprivileged underdog class. If they did do that, they'd be out calling out Hamas. In terms of the policing, it has been appalling. And I don't blame the police on the ground. They've been given operational instructions how to handle this. And I'm sure the instructions were to, you know, respect diversity and make sure everybody has their opinions heard. But the problem here is that Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and giving comfort to a terrorist organisation at a minimum ought to be treated as, disturbing the peace, as potentially a crime. And not only that, they weren't even sanctioned.
Good point.
Look, I think the police minister and the police commissioner, and I'll put a lot of emphasis on the commissioner, really need to get their act together. I thought, Chris Minns ran around afterwards trying to clean up the mess that they created. But this comes from woolly thinking about the issue. If you know the issue,
well,
and you
hang on a sec. The woolly thinking about the issues. I want to explore it because Michael Danby, Labor has had a real problem since the Gillard years, even before, with people like Bob Carr and Tony Burke and Chris Bowen playing footsies with Muslim extremists. You had Sheikh Lei, who died last week, a noted extremist. He should have been thrown out of the country. The immigration back then minister wanted to do that. Paul Keating, Leo McLeay made him overturn that decision. The hate preaching went on. It's incredible. Tony Burke, Chris Bowen, where are they? Where are they denouncing what was going on? Have they played with fire for too long? Because I just want to read you one quote from Tony Burke from 9 years ago at a Palestinian fundraising dinner. He said, "For those who are political advocates within Palestine itself, I will never know the bravery that comes with putting your life on the line and at risk in engaging in politics in different ways," which to me sounded like endorsing terrorism. Have Labor played footsie with these extremists for too long?
You're dead right, Andrew. I don't mean to embarrass Michael Costa, but especially in the New South Wales right, there's been a problem for more than a decade. These people can't describe themselves as social democrats. Sharket Musselman and Bob Carr and Michael Daly, the Attorney General, is part of that gang. It's exactly what Michael Costa said before, the false moral equivalence of a pack of Jews and a pack of Muzzies, you know. It's not the same. This is an organisation, Hamas, and these people demonstrating in their favour, who are a registered terror organisation. And you can see why they are. I'm sure ASIO is much more responsible than the New South Wales Police, and they've taken pictures of all of the faces who were shouting, "Gas the Jews, kill the Jews," because they're the people from whom future terrorist incidents originate. So it's a very serious situation.
With that, Michael, but see how many people are wearing masks.
Hopeless image for Australia all around the world.
Wearing masks.
Hopeless image.
Yeah, well, exactly
not all the time.
Correct. Michael Costa, we're running out of time, but I've got to ask you this. The Albanese government is giving around $32 million a year to the Palestinian territories, including Gaza, for things like schools and food and things like that. Should we halt that money, given that Hamas, which runs Gaza, had enough money of its own to fire 3,000 rockets into Israel last weekend and send hundreds of terrorists to go and kill Jews? If they've got money for that, why do they need Australia's?
Well, look, there's no question that should be not 1 cent going to Gaza. It is not an occupied territory. It's under the control of people that were elected by the population there. I know there hasn't been elections subsequently, but remember who put these people in charge in Gaza. It was the local population. Now, as for the Palestinian Authority and the West Bank, I mean, that's really a matter for the Australian government to discuss with the government of Israel. If they're prepared to allow humanitarian support, and I know Israel gives them humanitarian support. Fair enough. But Gaza is in a different category, and this is the conflating of
Different
Gaza
category.
with... Sorry?
No,
Absolutely.
Michael, if they can afford rockets, we don't need to send them food. That's bottom line. Michael Costa, Michael Danby, thank you both so much for your time. Incredible. We're living in a madhouse. After the break, Energy Minister Chris Bowen called out for spreading fake scares about nuclear power. Meanwhile, the energy system heads to crisis on his watch. Plus, protesters win again, forcing the annual Melbourne Cup Parade in Melbourne to be cancelled. And we'll give you the latest on another big election on Saturday, another Labor defeat. Right, well, Energy Minister Chris Bowen, the global warming extremist who's trying to shut our coal-fired power stations, has been called out. Because let's not forget, with all this drama going on, we can't afford to forget it. At the end of all this, we're still going to face a terrible problem: how to keep on the lights, how to have enough electricity for our homes, for our offices, for our factories. Because the problem is the Albanese government's green revolution is running way behind time, way over budget, and yet it still refuses to lift its irrational ban on nuclear power, which has no emissions and is totally reliable. Chris Bowen has said, oh, well, using nuclear is nuts because it's going to cost almost, what was the figure he plucked out of the air? $400 billion nearly. But now the Senior Vice President of Westinghouse, Rita Baranwal, has called him out. She says her company is making a 300 megawatt reactor, which costs less than $1.5 billion. And Bowen's figures are wrong, she said, but what does she know? She said, I only have 3 engineering degrees. Well, that math doesn't make sense to me. So who to believe? The executive with 3 engineering degrees or Chris Bowen, climate fanatic, who now says, oh, well, you know, if they can think they can deliver a nuclear power station for $1 billion US, throw in the Sydney Opera House and the Harbour Bridge. I don't see that being realistic. Well, joining me is former Resources Minister Matt Canavan, the National Senator, who's right on top of this topic. Matt Canavan, Chris Bowen seems to me a dangerous man who just won't be told. Or, I don't know, is he right? Reactors like this may be too expensive. I don't know.
Well, Chris Bowen is a zealot. He's an absolute obsessive zealot wanting to effectively push this country's energy system over the cliff. He has targeted this ridiculous 82% renewables when right now, today, more than 60% of our power comes from coal-fired power. So in just 7 years, he wants to completely revolutionise the way we make electricity. He has no real plans to do that. In fact, he sort of outlines he wants to build tens of thousands of solar panels a day, hundreds of wind turbines a month. I mean, how are we going to do this? He doesn't have any detailed answers here. Yet then he has the temerity to come up with these inflated numbers and accuse the other side of not having details. Our ban on nuclear power is long past its use-by date. It should be removed. But that's not going to fix everything, Andrew. We face a crisis this summer where speakers at a major energy summit today were warning for Australians to stock up on candles. And Chris Bowen's now saying it's all okay. We have acquired 120 megawatts in Victoria and South Australia of emergency power. You know what these emergency power sources are, Andrew? It's something called the Reliability and Emergency Reserve Trader Scheme. On the regulator's website, they say that what they're looking for this power is standby generation, including diesel generators. And so we're shutting down our coal-fired power stations and funding diesel generators, the dirtiest form of power, run on imported oil to keep the lights on. It is not worthy of a Hollywood script. It would be laughed at. It is so laughable that we are doing this to our nation.
It's obscene when you consider they're talking about nothing less than how to power a 21st century economy in Australia. I mean, this is not some change to a traffic light or something. This is so fundamental. And yet, as you say, you had that summit yesterday saying, with climate change advisory firm Pollination, saying experts there were terrified by the coming lack of electricity. Former head of Snowy Hydro saying, well, look, I think the power, we're looking at blackouts. It is, how on earth did this happen? Matt, I need to get to this issue. The ABC on Monday showed its team following Four Corners team following global warming extremes who plan to invade the home of Meg O'Neill. She's the head of Woodside Gas Company, until police happened to arrest them outside. Good on police. What struck me was the ABC's Media Watch on Monday had a law academic from the University of WA attack the police for wanting the ABC's footage. He said, you know, oh, here he is. Have a listen to him.
The real villains here are not the police, but Woodside and its thin-skinned CEO Meg O'Neill. She leads a massive fossil fuel company that is contributing to the destruction of our climate and is upset that hippies want to give her a hard time? Please.
Matt, a law academic laughing off a planned home invasion? I mean, seriously?
I mean, I wonder what he would think if random people came to his home and threatened himself and his family. It is the lack of just common decency in our society today. Well, I know I'm not suggesting anyone should do that, because it just we need to re-establish just basic decency among ourselves as Australians, and this is not the country I think many people grew up in. You don't go and harass people at their own homes. Whatever political disagreements you do, that is not something that is part of our Australian culture and should be utterly condemned. The ABC is completely out of control here, and there needs to be some changes to how this organisation is oversighted. There's not enough ministerial control. They're a law unto themselves. There needs to be independent assessment of complaints. The ABC, they currently handle all those complaints themselves, and they're not being upfront about those things. They're very cagey about what exactly happened here. We still don't really know the full details of to what extent their own journalists coordinated with these activists to be there just at the time this was occurring. It's an organisation, $1 billion organisation out of control, the ABC. It needs to be reined in.
Without a doubt, and maybe the law faculty of the University of Western Australia needs to have a look at what it's putting out in public. Matt Canavan, thank you so much for your time. And by the way, I've got to say, Melbourne always had an annual parade before the Melbourne Cup to mark the Melbourne Cup, and it's been scrapped because anti-racing animal rights protesters kept disrupting it. And so it's another victory for protesters. They rule the street. But I wonder why, no animal gets hurt in the parade. Why don't the organisers cancel the Melbourne Cup itself if they're going to give in to these people? It's just really enough is enough, isn't it? Well, there's a fact, by the way, going to be 2 big votes on Saturday, and both do involve race. The first, of course, is the vote for the voice. The other is the election in New Zealand, where the Labor government is on the nose, partly because of its brand of race politics. It's now the Labor government has got this loud Maori New Zealanders, who are just 17% of the population, increasingly get 50% of the say on things like some health bodies and water authorities. Well, earlier this year, with polls already showing the Labor in strife, Jacinda Ardern resigned as Prime Minister after being the superstar of the left overseas, not so much at home. She was replaced by Chris Hipkins, but Ardern has just bobbed up again to remind voters of the good old times.
Child poverty mattered a lot to me. That's why I made myself the Minister for Child Poverty Reduction. And in the last 6 years, we've made a lot of gains. We've started to see child poverty track in the direction that we need it to. It is not a given that if Labor is no longer in government, that will stay the same. In fact, we know it won't.
Now, that doesn't strike me as a winning pitch, but we're joined by someone who does know these things, broadcaster and journalist Sean Plunkett, founder and editor of the most excellent thing called The Platform. Sean, thank you so much for your time. Who's going to win on Saturday and why?
We will have a change of government, and it will change from the remarkable Labor majority to a national-led, that's our centre-right party government, but just who will rule with them and who will coalesce with them is less certain. It was going to be a party called ACT, who are to their right, but the real story of this election is the resurrection of a 78-year-old called Winston Peters and his populist party, New Zealand First. And they will be the kingmakers on Sunday.
Well, Winston is a friend of this program, so I can only say go Winston. But the why, now there are a number of issues, of course, economy, the lockdowns, etc., etc. Co-governance that I mentioned, giving the race politics of the Labor Party, is that playing a role?
Absolutely, though the main parties hunting for the centre ground do not really want to address it. However, it is the issue that has got Winston Peters back. He has hoovered up a disparate group of people most concerned about that issue and also about the COVID restrictions that led to Jacinda Ardern becoming so unpopular prior to her departure. And the right is essentially saying it will end the interpretations of our Treaty of Waitangi, which have led to separatist policies in water and in healthcare and in many other areas of public life and public services in New Zealand. It is ill-defined what the principles of the treaty are, and there is a feeling amongst many who are voting more conservatively this election that things have gone too far.
I hear what you're saying about the national leader who's likely to be the Prime Minister on Saturday. A bit of a blancmange, not really interested, a typical executive, not really interested in social issues that actually make so much difference. But listen, how come Jacinda Ardern, you mentioned her lack of popularity, how come she just popped up again in this campaign like she's a vote winner?
A desperate attempt by Labor, who are stuck in the mid-20s polling. That's half the support they had 3 years ago. A desperate attempt, I think, to shore up their core vote, much of which has bled left to the Green Party in New Zealand. And to give you an idea, Andrew, of how radical they are, one of their co-leaders suggested on television here last night that the Israeli Defence Force should be designated a terrorist organisation.
Oh, you're kidding me.
No, unfortunately, I am not.
Honestly, sometimes, honestly, Sean, this is just incredible. Just quickly, I'm out of time, but I just need to know, global warming policies play any role here?
No, strangely enough, climate change has not figured. But what has, and Jacinda Ardern mentioned child poverty, that hasn't been solved. And New Zealanders are in general doing it very tough. We are paying the price for the money we spent to keep our economy going while we all lived in isolation and sealed off, hermetically sealed off from the rest of the world.
A bit like Victoria in Australia. Sean Plunkett, thank you so much for your time. I hope we can come. You can come on the show next week and tell us how it all went down. Really appreciate your time. After the break, Britain's Labour Party also caught out trying not to criticise the terrorists who slaughtered and raped Jews. It's just extraordinary. How did the left get this sick? Plus a glitter attack on the Labour leader, Patrick Christie's, after this. It's not just in Australia where Palestinians and far-left protesters have been celebrating the slaughter and rape of Jews in Israel. We've seen them celebrate in New York. We've seen them celebrate in Canada. And we've especially seen them celebrate in Britain, in Manchester and in Birmingham. And for Celtic fans in Glasgow had a banner saying victory to the resistance. And there was celebrations in London as well. And like some politicians here, some Labour politicians in Britain at their party conference there refused to condemn Hamas or support Israel.
This is outside the conference zone.
Okay, all right. So do you stand with Israel?
It would be unfair for me to make comments, and it's not in my brief either. The Labour Party has always supported international law.
Asking the questions there was one of our regular commentators, Patrick Christie's, a presenter, star presenter at Britain's GB News. Patrick, you did a great job, but no answers, no good answers. What I'm seeing in Britain seems to be as frightening as what I'm seeing in Sydney.
Yeah, a lot of massive concern that we appear to have imported a huge number of people who would like to see Israel wiped off the face of the earth, and with it, the Jewish population as well. Some Labour MPs were a little bit squiffy on it. Some Labour MPs were pretty strong. They said, look, we do stand with Israel. But there's a checkered history there when it comes to that kind of stuff. What I find interesting is that our state broadcaster, the BBC, is still refusing to call Hamas terrorists. They're calling them militants. And on top of that as well, the police are yet to arrest any of these people in the streets for a hate crime. I mean, if they are out celebrating the slaughter of Jews and Jewish babies, I mean, what constitutes a hate crime? I think they're maybe too afraid of being called Islamophobic to actually do anything about it, which is a certain irony there, really. But we are also seeing, Andrew, as well, people in refugee camps on the Greek islands celebrating this. There, people, of course, are looking to make their way into Europe and seek asylum. I think that should be a pretty strong indication that maybe they shouldn't be getting asylum in Europe if they are celebrating what's going on in Israel at the moment.
Well, that's radical thinking right there, Patrick. Just quickly, the problem with these Labor politicians, what is it? Because I thought they said, oh, look, we've reformed Labor under Keir Starmer. It's no longer anti-Semitic as it was under former leader Jeremy Corbyn. And then you get what you just had.
Yes, unfortunately for the Labour Party, they've not been able to root it all out completely because it was so ingrained and so festering with Jeremy Corbyn, who still right now, his first response was to say that Israel is ultimately to blame for what's going on over there. What is interesting, Keir Starmer has not made a virtue of this. I was doing a bit of research last night. The new Labour leader, his wife is, I believe, actually Jewish, and their children are being raised in the Jewish faith, which makes it even more remarkable that he was so comfortable serving under Jeremy Corbyn for quite a while, but might now indicate why they're keener to do a little bit of a push there. The fact is that the Labour Party does rely quite heavily on Muslim votes. That's just the case. And so they don't want to alienate those votes by being too much in favour of Israel, which is a problem for them.
Patrick, exactly the same problem here. That's how politics gets remade demographically. Patrick Christie's, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. Well, that's it from me. Coming up next is Chris Kenny. From me, good night.